Welcome back to Cards and Comics, guys. Today I have a video where I'm talking directly to you and I want to talk to you about grading. It's been a while since I did a video like this, but I'm pretty fired up because, a lot of things that PSA has been doing recently has just proven the point over and over again. They do not care at all about vintage card grading. They don't. This is not how they're going to make their money in the future or how they're making their money today. Vintage cards to them are a nuisance. So let's go over some of the facts, some of the things that make me get to this conclusion, and I'm going to show you some other facts that really kind of just drive the point home about vintage card grading and PSA. One, the grading standard change they made. Now, I know a lot of people are thinking that 55-45 or 60-40 to 55-45 centering is all about modern cards. But if you look at vintage cards, there were vintage cards that graded 10s. And even if you go down to the 80s and 90s cards like the 89 Upper Deck Griffey, all this does is make it much harder for those cards to ever get 10s again. They were already pretty much impossible. And this just makes it even more tough for cards of those eras to ever gem. But PSA doesn't care, right? And if you go down to things like set registry, PSA used to incentivize set registry. They used to give, grading deals. They used to do a lot of things to make people want to buy cards to fill out their registry. It used to be $7 or $10 and I could grade my 61 Pirate Commons to build my team set. Now do I want to pay $25, $35 or go for a 6-month bulk grading, get back my cards, in maybe 6 months to a year, to get a slightly lower price. That bulk grading discount really doesn't incentivize anyone to grade commons anymore. Commons are where you need to build sets with. If you're going to build a 60 set or a 50 set, you need to be able to grade commons, and you really can't anymore. It's really not worth it to grade anything that's not a super high-end card. And I'll show you just some numbers here in a minute that's going to reinforce it. But really, all PSA is saying today is, if you're grading vintage with us, and it's not a 7 or better card, you might be better off just buying raw. We've gotten full circle here, guys, where raw cards are becoming just as valuable in the vintage world as the graded copies, which is really the only reason why grading took off to begin with, was because people didn't trust the vintage grading, the overgrading, the all the trimming and all the stuff that was happening prior to grading coming in. Now we're back full circle to where people now are starting to prefer raw cards again. And that's happening in comic books as well. Raw comic books are starting to take off again as a preferred format for a lot of collectors, right? Now, let's look at some other data, right? Chris from baseball card dealer, collector investor dealer, did a great video on modern cards and why they're terrible to grade. And so I think that was a great point of view on the modern cards. Like you pretty much are just throwing your money away if your cards become 8s, 9s, if it's not a 10, it's pretty much not worth the grading fee. You can just buy the card in a 10 and save money versus trying to grade cards. And that's sort of his video. Did a great job explaining it. But let's go into the gem mint data just to kind of prove my point about why PSA doesn't care about vintage. Then we'll go to pricing. So, here is gem mint data or gem rate data. We got to go down to, well, for one thing, TCG is becoming a massive part of the grading business. So, do you think PSA is going to incentivize vintage cards over TCG or give kind of a rat's butt about anything other than modern cards and TCG cards? No. Because if you look at the data, we'll go down here by era, and this is how many items PSA is graded by era. Look at 50s, 60s, and 70s. Like less than 5% across the board. And it only gets to 10% when you get to the 90s, right? But it just shows you that the bulk is in modern cards. 60% of sports cards, 70% of modern TCG cards, TCG cards are all in that modern era. You go to SGC, who they've acquired, they got 14% of their grading in 50s, 7% in the 60s. Like, they outpace PSA, some cases 6 to 7 times what PSA is doing for the similar era of sports card. So just shows you that pre-war cards are being graded by SGC, not PSA anymore. And I know you can say, well, it's 2% on a much higher volume, but if you start normalizing the data, what you're seeing is that PSA doesn't grade a high percentage volume-wise of those cards, and why should they care about them? Why should they do this at registry? Why should they make those cards part of their growth strategy when they're not? And the biggest thing here is if you talk to graders, if you talk to dealers, vintage cards take longer to grade. They have to do a lot more work to verify that those cards are not been trimmed, altered, soaked, power erased, whatever, chemically altered than they do most modern cards. Now, I know people are going to scream, "Oh my God, so much stuff is happening with these '90s cards and some modern cards." That's not anywhere close to what has to happen on a card by card basis on a lot of pre-war and vintage cards. They take longer to grade, period. And PSA recognizes that. That's why, if you ever submit cards to PSA, if you put vintage in your order, that's going to slow down those cards tremendously compared to modern cards. It's not even debatable. They take longer to grade. PSA spends more time on them. So they have a slower turnaround time. They're a much lower percentage of their business than anything else from the 2020s. And if you add TCG into it, why would they care about vintage cards? Why would they care? Now, so that's what the PSA side of it, right? If you just look at these numbers, vintage to PSA is a non-growth, dead segment. They care about TCG cards, they care about modern cards, because that's where all the money is. That's what's going to grow them. And if you think about it just from a total business perspective, they're making modern cards every month, right? New cards are coming to the market that they can grade. Vintage cards have a finite amount available no matter what. Modern cards, they're printing them every day, every month. New cards are coming out. So that's where they're going to focus, right? That makes sense if you're a business person to say, why should we spend a lot of time on cards that are hard to verify, that are altered quite a bit, especially the high-end ones, takes longer to grade, and there's a lot less of them, and we could just spend all of our time focused on the high-volume era of cards, which is modern. And I think they bought SGC to hedge their bets. Like, hey, if you want to grade vintage cards, send them to SGC. And I think that's going to be the future of PSA's messaging or incentives. They'll incentivize collectors to send their vintage cards into SGC. SGC do it. We own them, so hey, we're making money. But this takes those graders, that were focused on a slower, more troublesome part of our business, and get them grading cards that make us a lot more money that we can turn around a lot faster. Now, let's go to values, right? Like, why should collectors, keep sending vintage cards into PSA? If you have something super high-end, Mantle, Ruth, Jackie Robinson cards, this doesn't hold as much weight. But if you've got just normal vintage cards, you've got even Clemente, very, very collectible player, but even players below Clemente, Ernie Banks, Frank Robinson, those kind of players, the PSA grades don't matter as much in terms of value, because the number one thing with PSA is that they create value. Grading your cards means that every time, this is the old PSA mantra or motto, is that the raw card value will be much less than the graded value. So that price you're paying, that premium you're paying for the grading and it's going to translate to a higher sale. And in a lot of cases now, it's not. It's not translating to higher sales. But, well, if you look at, and again, I'm a big Clemente collector, so I always use him for some examples, but I'll give you two examples of players, right? In Clemente's world, right? So we've got cards here. These are raw cards sold on eBay. And, the first I'm going to show you here is a card sold by Greg Morris. And a lot of the vintage guys will scream at me like, Greg Morris cards sell for higher no matter what, because he's got such a big following on eBay. But I just want to show this, one card and, just show you what the price is. So he advertised this as VG, VGX, or a 3 condition, right? And go back, 1784, let's say $1,800 is what this card sold for. If you look at the average price of a PSA 3, $1,824, and an SGC 3, $1,700. So if you just look at that 4 value, or 3 to 4 value, it's pretty much right there. Okay, you can say, well, if it grades a 4, it might be a little bit more. But look at the card. It's completely cut off. It's not a high eye appeal 3 or 4 no matter what. This card brought almost a full value of a PSA 3 on its own without any sort of grading. So that just shows you, like, people are starting to just buy cards they like if they're, somewhat reasonable for the grade. I don't have to pay the PSA price for some of these cards or pay the price to get them graded if they're going to sell for this much value. Look at this 2. PSA 2, or sorry, SGC, a raw 2 that's off center in both directions. Okay, this card isn't great. It's advertised as a 2. If you look at a 2 brings $1,200 on average in both PSA and SGC. And if you look at that card, it brought $1,200 right here, $1,200. It's bringing the price of a graded card for its advertised raw condition. Most people will value raw cards 1 to 2 grades below their PSA listed condition, but they're selling for their exact value for the most part. Just crazy. And here's another example again, Greg Morris. But I just showed you a card that wasn't Greg Morris. Okay, 69 tops, Greg Morris, near mint or better, So what's a PSA 8 of this card so far? Because your best case scenario is this card grades a PSA 8. Because 9s and 10s are impossible with vintage cards in PSA right now. So let's say it grades an 8. You get an 8 on this card. You buy it raw, you get it graded, it comes back an 8. Okay? Well, an 8's worth $540 in a PSA and $540 in an SGC. That's another thing too. The prices are kind of normalizing with each other. So $540, say $550. You paid $810. You're banking that this card's going to grade higher than a PSA 8, and I'm just going to say, like, when I looked at this card online, you could look at the corner right there. That is not going to grade. You got chipping here, you got I think chipping. You got damage down there. So again, I don't think this card is a high end. That corner there is not, to me, a card that's going to grade higher than 8. You can see damage front to back. Those edges, look at that corner right there. There's no way that card's getting higher than a 7, in my opinion. But someone paid $810 for that card. Why? But that's the thing, is raw cards are bringing crazy prices compared to what they used to. And the last one I'll show you is a 60 Clemente, not Greg Morris, baseball card Emporium. Buy it now for $475. It looks nice. Like in that photo, it looks nice for a 6. So what does a PSA 6 60 Clemente go for? Well, if I pull it up here, $312 and $240 for an SGC. $312 for a PSA 6, $240 for an SGC, and then a 7 brings about $500, $450 to $500, and this guy paid $4.75. He paid one whole value. He paid the full near mint price for a raw card. And this happens. I can go through card after card after card of Clemente and see this price difference happening to where the raw cards, if they, in this case, look nice, but in some cases don't even look nice, are bringing PSA graded values. Only till you get to the 8 and above grade do you see that pricing not hold as much. But my gosh, that 69 Clemente brought more, $300 more than the PSA 8. Just crazy, right? But that's what's happening. People don't care as much anymore about the grades, about getting their card graded. They just want nice looking cards for their sets or to collect or to have. And now go to Mantle, and this is where it doesn't hold as true. So in Mantle, I think, and this is what I talked about is, let's look at this 58 Mantle All-Star near mint to mint or better. And you look at the price here, $11.50 for an 8, $5.50 for a 7. The card sold for $9.35. Shot right in the middle. So again, someone saying, I think this card's going to grade between a 7 and 8. If it gets an 8, I make money. Grades a 7, I lose money. This is a lot more similar to what the pricing used to look like for raw cards. If it looked nice, could grade higher, I might make money. If it grades the one grade lower, I lose money. That's more normal because it's Mantle. And then if the other cards I'm looking at, the 68 Mantle here that sold for $7.87. Okay, if that card graded an 8, it's at $1,800. If it grades a 7, $7.65, you're kind of whole, right? So that's, again, that is much more common, right? That it's advertised as an 8. I buy it for what a PSA 7 might bring. And if I get one grade higher, I make money. If I grade what it tells me, it's going to grade, I make money. If it's one grade lower, I don't lose money. That was the common way of doing it. It's not working that way anymore for a lot of players. So PSA is not providing the value for a lot of vintage players like they used to. You have to have a Mantle or a Ruth or something really high end and super desirable that people are willing to hedge their bets and kind of, because they're so expensive already. That's another thing too, is these cards are already very expensive. So it's just an interesting thing to think that the market's changing this fast on vintage cards to where the PSA, it's not a big part of PSA's portfolio anymore. They don't care about it. They're nuisance cards. The value equation isn't working for vintage cards anymore. SGC, the values, you look at the here in VCP where you see the price difference between a PSA and an SGC card is evaporating. $30, $20, $40 difference versus PSA. In a lot of cases, the value is very similar. So again, everything seems to be pushing towards SGC is becoming the vintage collector, grader of choice, or PSA just doesn't care anymore. They hope the volume goes there. They just want to focus on modern cards. So that's where we're at, guys. That's the market right now. PSA doesn't care about vintage anymore. They're going to de-emphasize vintage going forward. They're going to change their grading standards. They're going to do everything possible to push vintage into SGC, in my opinion, and not care about the registry anymore. The big sign that this is going to happen in the future is if they open up the registry to SGC cards. We'll see what happens there. But I can see, because if this isn't a big part of their business anymore, that could be a future where you could register your SGC cards in your PSA registry and have a combined registry. That would really help SGC cards. But I can see where the PSA, the loyalist would get really upset. So we'll see what happens, guys. It's kind of crazy what's happening right now. That gem rate data just proves hey, this isn't PSA's future business model. So let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you next time on Cards and Comics. Bye.